Hi everyone, it's Abby Shapiro. I just did an interview with BobaTalks and it was really fun. You guys are really going to want to see it. It comes out on Friday, so be sure to check it out.
So Doom Patrollers, that little intro that just played was an amazing message from Abigail Shapiro, who plays Dorothy Spinner herself, the new star of Doom Patrol Season 2. I got a chance to speak to her yesterday, talking all about this episode. So make sure you don't miss out on that video coming tomorrow on the channel. It goes very hand in hand with this episode. It was an absolute thrill getting to speak to Abigail Shapiro about literally my favorite DC TV show. There's a lot that you guys will appreciate, I'm sure. So yeah, it's quite a long interview. It's around 45 minutes or so long. So definitely make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on so you don't miss out on that video as soon as it goes live. But today's episode, guys, Dad Patrol, written by Tom Farrell and April Fitzsimmons. It was another very good episode, of course. But one thing we have to bear in mind, everyone, is that this is the penultimate episode of Doom Patrol Season 2. Quite literally, next week, out of nowhere, it's the finale. We were supposed to be getting 10 episodes this season, but due to the pandemic, it has kind of been condensed down to 9. It really does suck. I don't want it to end. I love talking about Doom Patrol. I'm going to try my best to still deliver you guys Doom Patrol content in the off-season. This episode provided a lot of good setup for that finale. We had a lot more exploration into Jane and what's going on in the underground there, with a very interesting ending. I feel like the endings of Doom Patrol recently in their episodes have really been WTF moments, more so than even last season. It was very wholesome seeing Cliff connect to his daughter Clara, and of course we had, well, this episode is named Dad Patrol. We had Niles wanting to spend one last day with his daughter Dorothy. So let's get to this review. As always, everyone, I would really appreciate a like on this video just to show your support for the channel when you're hyped for Doom Patrol, and let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below as usual. But let's get into this. This episode started off with yet another flashback to Arkansas, 1954. Now this was when Kay Chalice's father was forcing her to go into the well in their backyard. It's basically this punishment, and this really did set up the story for what was going on this episode with Jane, because she really wants to prove that she is the right primary for the job over Miranda. And my god, things get very even more so fishy with Miranda this episode. Just as they start bringing it around, they then take it away from you. But yeah, Jane just basically proposes all of the fishy stuff going on recently. How it's weird for Scarlet Harlot to go missing and Lucy Fuke. And this is when Miranda confronts Jane and puts the excuse as they didn't disappear, they moved on. And she's even pointing out that we're finally starting to heal. And that is really the job of the primary, to help Kay Chalice move forward. So if Kay is getting better, then, you know, at this point in the episode, I was thinking, okay, that does make sense. Because if she does get better, then each need for each personality, for example, Baby Doll was more of the playful side of Kay Chalice, even though Jane is a much, or should I say Kay Chalice is a much older person. There's still a need for all of these individual personalities, but if one heals, then, you know, maybe bit by bit, Kay may let go of that. And I really like the kind of motivation Jane has this episode, because for her, she's absolutely terrified, because for the time being during the episode, she was worried that she would just disappear, become redundant, not needed, and she needed to prove herself, and that just set up for a really cool adventure. I don't know about anyone else, but I feel like Jane this episode, out of all of the episodes that we've seen her in, was probably the most level-headed she's ever been. But also something in this episode I was very much looking forward to was the continuation of Cliff and his daughter. Like, seeing Cliff being so happy, it is just very wholesome. Like, despite, as I mentioned in my previous review, people getting a bit irritated by Cliff, even though I think that what the writers have done is completely justifiable. If you just imagine for a second being in Cliff's position and then having the revelation that this man, Niles Caulder, at the end of last season did this to you, But you could only imagine, like, in episode 1, 2, 3, and the rest of this season, how angry Cliff Steele has been at Niles Caulder. So I really haven't minded that. But yeah, this was really nice because he was getting to know his daughter. She's very, very pregnant. She's also getting married, and we had these, like, funny little reactions from Cliff because he was really trying to overcompensate for how long he hasn't been there, to the point where he was fixing her tires or checking her tire pressure, brake fluid, all of that kind of stuff. He also had these sincere moments, like she said, "Where's your bed?" but if you really think about it, and Cliff pointed this out, like, I don't need one, and that is very true. Like, this is another tragic thing, so despite all the funny scenes and comedy that happens in Doom Patrol, there's sometimes just lines like this that bring you kind of down in a good way. Because it's like Cliff still, you can't forget, he can't really sleep, he can't feel, he can't touch, he can't smell, he can't do this, he can't do that. It's kind of like a sad reminder, and I think that was, also quite a emphasizing moment for Clara as well, about how her father has been living for all this time. But another funny thing as well is when he was creating her that breakfast, I was hoping something would come out of that finger, but it turns out that he fried or cooked that finger as well. So I'm guessing the whole finger may not be used as what we were all speculating. I mean, obviously with Niles Caulder's little plans for Robot Man 2.0, one of the sketches had his finger coming out of his head. Somehow maybe he'd be able to feel something or just have some kind of semblance of sense. But I don't know. I really don't know. We've only got one episode left. I don't know what's going on with that finger. I also just like seeing Clara act similar to Cliff. You can, whether it's just the F-bombs and the way they speak, you can tell it's kind of like father, like daughter. And I don't really know what more to say. It was just really nice seeing these two connect after Cliff has been so miserable. Don't forget that if you really take it into account, we've seen him, you have to add up all the time, right from the beginning, all of his storyline in season 1, with him wanting to see Clara, all of it this season, and now it's finally happening. And now he's even going to her wedding, and he knows that she's having a son. Cliff couldn't really be in a better place right now, and it's almost too good to be true. Please don't let something tragic happen with Cliff. Like, is this it for Cliff this season? Is this like the peak? I don't know. And we're very lucky, everyone, because Mark Sheppard obviously was very much so in this episode. I believe he'll be in the next episode, because either way, there's a lot to deal with obviously Candlemaker. That first got warned by seeing Kipling and the others all in their kind of wizard-like robes surrounding Bunbury, who has apparently overstepped, and an apology is in order, but he's like, well, what's the point, Grandmaster? None of us have much time left. And that is where he says that there's rumors over the hill and the dale, whispers of a cataclysmic event, which, as we all know, very much ties and foreshadows what is going on with Candlemaker and Dorothy. This continued on with Niles getting a call from Kipling, and somehow he got the communication through some little, I don't know, cupcake, rice cake things. Kipling says that there's been some chatter amongst the flora and fauna. Bunbury's terrified, says the end is near, and this all panned down to Kipling doing some more research, saying that prehistoric thing, referring to the Candlemaker, will rip them all to shreds if Little Miss Sunshine matures any further. But Niles assures Kipling that she's just a little girl and she will remain that way. No matter what, he wants to move up the rendezvous, because if the freaking Bunbury is saying that something's gonna happen, well, he can't trust what Chief says, because clearly Dorothy is growing old. And in this episode, that actually does happen. She gets her first period. So that's kind of confusing, since Dorothy has been artificially kept at a certain age, 11, but it seems that that's kind of faded off a little bit, since it seems that the aging process has kicked back in. Otherwise, like, this wouldn't have happened this episode. Also, they have changed things up slightly from the comic books anyway, but no flack there at all. This is an adaptation, it's not all copy and paste. It's interesting to see what innovative ways they add on to Candlemaker's storyline, Dorothy Spinner's storyline. I mean, for crying out loud, Dorothy Spinner in the comic books isn't even Niles' daughter. But the reason why I thought Candlemaker was getting more kind of, as I said last episode review, educated, is because as of when each wish Dorothy made, I assumed that kind of made him more powerful, which definitely kind of does mirror the comics. And I don't think that is untrue to the show, but it seems that in the show as well, on top of that when Dorothy is kind of aging and growing up and maturing, so does Candlemaker. It's kind of a blend between those two at least. But yet again, the way this episode was shot, the scenes between Niles and Dorothy, and I speak about this with Abigail tomorrow, it's just nothing. Some of the best scenes in this whole season are between Timothy Dalton and Abigail Shapiro. Their chemistry is just amazing, and this was such a sweet time between them two, and very bittersweet, because as we all know as an audience, we got to see what Chief was saying to Kipling at the end of last episode, and this whole time when you're watching this episode, you don't quite know where things are going, what's going to happen to Dorothy. Is she just going to get taken away out of nowhere? Obviously it didn't end quite like that, but either way, just knowing the whole motive and seeing Chief very bittersweet himself, not really wanting to follow through with what he organized with Kipling at the end of last episode, it's all just such a kind of sad thing to witness unfold, whilst Dorothy is completely unaware and has this, as anyone should, a complete blind trust in their father, but is really being kind of backstabbed. but for kind of a complex reason. Like, Chief thinks he's doing the right thing. At this point, Dorothy goes into the gas station because Niles says she can get whatever she wants, and this is where all of a sudden she realized that she was bleeding, and just as Kipling feared, this is like a telltale sign of her maturing. But obviously Dorothy, this is something I found very compelling about the episode as well. She felt like she couldn't exactly share that with her father. She didn't even know what was going on herself. She obviously just went to the bathroom in the gas station. And I really like that scene between the worker there, that lady, and her, because she's never had that parental relationship with Niles. I mean, don't get me wrong, she has, but it's in such kind of a way that Niles always looks upon Dorothy as his little girl, like deliberately so, because she was even kept younger deliberately. You add all of this into all of those decades and decades that Dorothy was isolated, completely alone, what that would do to you, how confusing the world is, let alone this happening to you. It's just, I don't know, I just found it like a really sweet scene, and especially now Dorothy doesn't have a mother. And that reminds me, her mother does pop up in this episode, and in a very weird tribal spiritual way. I really enjoyed the following scenes between Niles and Dorothy in the fair. Yet again, if you're just a big fan of Dorothy anyway, and think about the background of her character, it's just great seeing her out into the world having a good time, because I'm willing to bet she's probably never done this. I think, as we've seen in flashbacks, Niles always went to see her on the street, but I don't think he ever risked taking her out, which, yet again, can you even imagine for a single second? I also just love how considerate Dorothy is, like when she was playing that game and she just wanted that big blue bear just to give to Jane because she was wondering about how, if she would like it, because she still feels extremely bad about what happened to Baby Doll and Flaming Katie. And yet again, guys, with the interview tomorrow that I had with Abigail Shapiro, we get into all of that, and a lot of you were wondering about what was the wish that she made for Candlemaker to go and kill Baby Doll. All of that, guys, we get into. But this is when her mother started appearing. It was some kind of weird mojo kind of thing that obviously happens because clearly there's something with Dorothy's people where they can make imaginary friends into real life, like actual beings. And this is not just unique to her, but her mother had that gift as well. So somehow there's some weird spiritual stuff going on here. And she was presenting these tribal boots, this tribal gown. All the while, Niles, at the same time, his mortality is catching up to him. Don't forget how old he is. And if you all of a sudden have your mortality, trinket stripped away from you, your immortality one, your body would start aging at an accelerated rate. So it's catching up with him right as Dorothy is kind of inadvertently causing the end of the world. So like it's almost coming to fruition in how he wanted to live one day longer than Dorothy, if you know what I mean. But please, I don't want Dorothy to die. I don't even want the Chief to die. I really, oh man. But this is when Dorothy goes into another kind of fair experience, and in this walkthrough, she's kind of temporarily teleported to her home, the kind of wilderness. All while this was happening, we got to see those tribal rocks that the carvings were on last season, at the kind of same location as where Chief went last episode. At this point, she's wearing the tribal poncho, the shoes, and everything like that, and was even given this kind of clan stuff. So this is what I mean. This is what I was talking about, what I was saying earlier. Is this kind of prehistoric, as Kipling says, apocalyptic, creating Candlemaker like a rite of passage for like when a girl or a man comes of age in this clan's or tribal's people. But ultimately, even though she hasn't made the third and final wish that usually stems all of this in the comics, it seems that the apocalypse is coming whether she makes it or not, which is very, very interesting. However, though, even though the lollipop started melting and everything seems to start melting, I'm thinking maybe she still does make another wish, which is the one that really springboards everything into action, because Niles is dying. And as I theorized a few episodes ago, and it's kind of an obvious one, maybe she does make another wish because Niles, especially when he kind of came out of his seat this episode speaking to Kipling, I was like, oh my god, is he actually croaking right here, right now? Even though he didn't, I think Dorothy next episode may make things 10 times worse than even the end of the episode, because she doesn't want her dad to die, and she's gonna make a wish for Candlemaker to save him. But we got some very interesting scenes with Larry this episode. It's always great when we get to see Matt Bomer again in the actual makeup and even in flashbacks. So the negative spirits seem to have got up to some things in his sleep. Yet again, Larry is still just as frustrated as in season 1 even than he is in this moment right now, because it's still unclear as to what the negative spirit is trying to articulate to him, because even despite trying to reconnect with his family and all of that, it didn't exactly work out yet the spirit is still persisting and persisting and persisting as it does. But this flashback scenes, they always get me, especially with the added weight and context of previous episodes now, with what we found out about Paul, how he never stopped searching for his father and was always hopeful right up until his death. As usual, the music added into the backgrounds of these scenes help pierce your soul, and yeah, I'll always never not feel insanely feelsy in moments like this. But this is when Larry decides to accompany Jane, because earlier she actually did approach Cliff, but he was obviously busy with Clara this episode, so she went to Larry and got his assistance. But I don't know if anyone spotted it, there was that slight little moment. I don't think you're meant to read into it too much, but blatantly at this point, Jane and Cliff do have that kind of relationship, as like Cliff is like a father figure to her almost. And that second when she did see Clara with Cliff in this episode, and as she was starting to walk away, before she did, she kind of stopped there and was like, oh, you know, and carried on. I don't think she's jealous or anything. It just kind of washed over her a little bit, like, oh man, like, oh, he might be going away from me a bit more now because his actual daughter is here. But despite Flip being able to teleport anywhere, Larry and Jane were walking right outside the farmhouse because, you know, Flip would only teleport so close to the childhood home of Kay Chalice. Yet again, in these moments, Jane is kind of scared to go back, but it doesn't matter. As she said herself, the girl lost something here and she's got to get it back. She wants to make herself useful. If she doesn't, then it is basically nice knowing you, because she may very well be indeed erased. This is where they get to the well. Before they get into the truth, they make us sympathize with Miranda, and of course so. And I think I really do know why this is happening. First of all, we get to see another flashback to Kay older. At this time, at this point, Kay Chalice had suffered from that kind of mental break that split all of these personalities and created all of them. Now, this is before all of the personalities got special powers due to the Dominator gene bomb kind of thing, even though they showed it in an injection last season. So it wasn't quite the Dominator gene bomb, but something. Kay Chalice was probably like, what, 14, 15, 16? She had all the personalities with no powers, and this was Miranda. So Miranda was the primary, and she was getting abused by her father because apparently she made eyes with another boy at church, and I bet that sick bastard was probably jealous or something. And it's also just really frustrating seeing, and it highlights the disregard of mental health, which is obviously a very real thing, because her father's like, enough with that Miranda crap. He didn't believe that literally Kay Chalice, his daughter, had genuine different personalities, which is a very real thing, and it just irritated him further. So she got into the well, and we saw how terrified Miranda was, and this immediately made Jane completely sympathize with her, and completely changed her stance on Miranda. It convinced her that, oh, she is someone to trust. I get why she's doing all of this now. Maybe she is the right person for primary and should be primary again, and maybe she is helping heal Kay Chalice. But this all amounted to some very, very crazy things. So Jane went down to the well because she wanted to find the little plushie that Kay used to have, that it was hidden behind one of the well bricks. But she also finds a note, and that is when Jane was kind of immediately brought into the underground with Miranda. So at this point, the audience, Jane, everyone is completely, you know, in awe of Miranda, really, because she's the one who probably was responsible, and she was, for escaping that household. You have to assume as of this moment, Jane or Miranda, Kay ran away, and all of the personalities helped look after her as of that moment. And then the rest was history as to how she got powers. Jane says to Miranda in the underground that she's so much stronger than she would have ever have been, and that from now on, Jane will fall in line. Which is when it just completely flips on its head. She throws the teddy back into the well and pushes Jane in the well. And quite literally, in the well's water, she sees the bodies of Baby Doll and Flaming Katie, who've like been decomposing this whole time. It's really rotten, quite the twist. I'm not saying it was completely unexpected, but they did such a good job of subverting our expectations for really sympathizing with Miranda. It's 100% confirmed she's getting rid of people and their stations through throwing them into the well one by one. My only theory with this, I know people are reading into that maybe the dad is somehow kind of in that. I don't think that's the case, like taking over Miranda or anything. I think Miranda has such a complex of wanting to look after Kay that she's getting rid of everyone else and Jane and anyone who is a threat, that's so that she can always be the one in control. I know that's so basic, but that's all I can think of right now, is that she is really wanting to maintain control and never wants to stop that. She is the one who helped save Kay. She's the one who really, you know, escaped that home and was the original primary that really rescued her. So I feel like in present day, she feels like she deserves that spot still. But I do feel like I'm missing a piece of the puzzle there, because it definitely doesn't completely add up. Like, is that really the only reason? And now Jane is down there, and how the hell is this going to get resolved in Wax Patrol, the finale? I don't know if everything will, especially with the last episode being cut off this season, which definitely does suck. We're gonna have to wait and see. But this was very mind-blowing. Just as you started to feel bad for Miranda, it completely flips the coin on its head. And lastly, everyone, we had some Rita and Cyborg stuff, some very interesting stuff with Ronnie and Cyborg. But first of all, it started with Rita coming to Victor, pointing out her spot in the paper after her heroic act last week. And this just added for such an hilarious, like the way she just carries herself in this kind of new persona. She's loving it, but getting way over her own head. But this is when, on the very same paper, Vic finds out a headline that the Quorum VP was found murdered in a private residence, and he immediately knew that this could link to Ronnie. And as we all knew, this picks up from that pure uncut Uma jelly that Ronnie managed to steal at the end of last episode from the Queen's tent. They present that bottle of uncut Uma jelly as well, which was interesting, because it looked like hardly any of it was drunk, but I guess she only had a sip of it, and that was enough to already do to her what it had done, giving her these abilities, but also healing her. And that was pretty interesting, because I didn't necessarily expect that, because when Cyborg found Ronnie in that kind of diner or cafe place, Ronnie says, I was dying, I took the Uma jelly, and now I'm not dying. So I guess like the whole surgery thing is completely unnecessary now, because that Uma jelly, as we know, it gives you abilities, extraordinary abilities, but that completely healed that attachment point that was leaking this poison into her organs. And I know a lot of you also pointed out as well that this is kind of a gender flipped Ronald Evers, obviously from the comic books, who turns out to be one of Cyborg's enemies but once friend. And yeah, I really like how they did transition that into kind of a slightly more sentimental and romantic side and story for Cyborg to tackle this season. It's also very difficult because this is very hard for Cyborg, because she literally is killing people in cold blood, and he asks her if she's going to do it again, and she's kind of in that mode of, well, I'm going to do what I got to do. I like you, but I'm not going to let you stop me. This ended up in a cool little fight. She starts punching him, and you know, that's when the sonic cannon comes out. Yet again, this makes things tricky, because it's not like he's going to literally sonic cannon her head off. So I'm super intrigued as to how this story is going to resolve as of the finale. But will every storyline be resolved in a satisfying way, considering we were meant to get a whole other 50-ish minute episode? Quite another integral moment happened in this scene as well, because Rita had the chance to stop Ronnie, and obviously she's been elevating herself with such superhero confidence as the Beekeeper, but she kind of pussied out a little bit and let Ronnie go right past her. But understandably so, and this was very deliberate, because I think Rita, despite how far she's come already, isn't quite, and as Cyborg and was foreshadowing right at the beginning of this episode, saying, don't you think you need to take it slow? Don't you think this is going? She's getting way too ahead of herself, and this grounds her back down to earth to be like, okay, I need to take one bit at a time. And as I said, guys, the end of the episode had that carousel scene with Dorothy with the piano in the background. Like, honestly, music is so integral to shows. It really is. I think a lot of people don't realize that is that added in with a very well acted scene is what makes you very emotional, and this scene nailed it, especially when she was like, I love being out in the world with you, Papa. This was truly the best day ever. Knowing exactly what Niles wanted to do, I think that tipped him over the edge to the point of where he said to Willoughby Kipling, I don't know if I can do this anymore. But regardless, that is when the clown statue starts melting next to them, and instantly Kipling knows what this is. This is what Bunbury was warning him about. Obviously Kipling has a bit more of a expertise and insight into like these world magical ending events, and he says himself, you were busy being Father of the Year, we missed our chance, now that incandescent beast is coming whether we like it or not. The freaking lollies were melting, everything was melting, and yet again kind of confusing to me, because I thought Candlemaker would release upon the world when another wish was made, but it looks like the apocalypse is happening because she is obviously coming of age. Yet I'm still very convinced that another wish is still going to be made. So it's like, will that mean double trouble because due to Candlemaker? And this is why adaptations are still adaptations. They're not copy and paste from the comic books, because if they really truly did every copy and paste from every aspect of the comic books, then you would know everything that's coming. And that's why I appreciate new innovative story made just like this, because it makes people like me who may know a little bit more than your typical person who's new to Doom Patrol completely surprised as well, because I don't really know where this is going. I have a couple of guesses as to what will happen in the finale that they may pull from the comic books, but this and what they've already done with Dorothy this season, Candlemaker, and all of this background has already been very well received in my books. Innovative story that complements the original comic book storyline. But let me know all of your thoughts with this episode down in the comments below. I love talking about it with you. I can't wait to find out what happens to Jane. I can't wait to find out what happens just with Candlemaker. There's almost too much that they've got to resolve in episode 9, which is unfortunately the last episode. But other than that, guys, like this video. If you did enjoy it, make sure you subscribe for all brand new videos that like this. I'm sure you will enjoy other videos as well. Follow me on Twitter if you want to stay up to date with me a little bit more. I have Instagram as well, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you Doom Patrollers in the next video. Goodbye.